What's up? Oh, what happened to
Where,
John?
where'd Chana go?
Oh man, that's funny. He probably got called out. What's up, Ed? I guess I'm doing the intro. Welcome to the Daily HiFi Show. Today we have Ed Mullen. Oh, there's Shada.
Oh, he's getting. I ate already, so I'm good to go in that area.
That's hilarious. We have Ed Mullen, and says here that you're the Senior Director of Technology and Customer Service.
Yep.
So that's pretty awesome. Technology and customer service. Those are, yeah, customer service is tough. Chana should know.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't like that stuff.
You know, if you're going to do customer service, it's got to run in your blood, and you have to have an innate ability and passion for taking care of people, helping them get to a better place in their audio setup and their system on their audio journey. It's very gratifying to work in customer service. So it's always been a passion of mine. And of course, the technology end is fun, and I've always enjoyed working with product development and describing how our products fit into the audio world and video world and into our marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to have a lot of patience, I think. The intention is good, but some people need a little bit more hand-holding than others. And yeah, you just
that's an acquired skill, Joe, over the years. Chana can probably attest to that. Some customers are super users and super technically adept, and other ones not so much. So you have to understand how to speak to your audience and understand what their technical level of understanding is and communicate in their terms. So you're always adjusting as you go on the fly with customer service.
Yeah, I mean, I teach music. I teach piano and guitar to 7-year-old kids all the way up to like 30-year-old adults. So yeah, patience is key.
Yep,
for sure. So I know all about it.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm glad to have you. I've been asking to have you on for a while. Been bugging Nick, like I need to get Ed on here, because a lot of times on their happy hours, they're doing their thing, and I've talked to Nick, and talked to him a lot, and the Larry.
And you probably said, "Hey, how come you guys aren't doing more lightning round questions?" Right?
But anyway, I hear you. You chime in. I'm like, I want to hear more from that guy. I feel like a lot of times companies need to show like more the engineering side. I think maybe they think that people aren't interested, but this is at least our audience, or maybe just me. I don't know. I'm interested. I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to dive more into the stuff that you've talked about.
Well, the tech side is fun, and when I have an opportunity to do a deeper dive with a sort of a super user, high level customer, it's fun because you're sort of communicating on the same level. You have a similar understanding. They're bringing high level topics to you, like Roomy Q Wizard plots and MSO of data and placement and phasing and time alignment, and it's room treatments, maybe bass traps, panels, diffusers. So it's kind of fun to get into sort of a tech nerd out and geek out for a while.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I got to speak with Dr. Floyd Tool today.
Oh, really?
Wow. Yeah, it happens to be his birthday today, so happy birthday to Dr. Floyd Tool. And
that man is a legend in the industry.
Yes, and asked him some questions, and it's just very interesting. Though I love to debate. Even it doesn't even have to be like full agreement on everything, but when you respect what the other person says, it's like I have to take into account that this person has put a lot of thought into this. And so you can't just come with like silly questions, If I ask him a question, I need to think it out.
I always say when Floyd Tool speaks, you shut your mouth and you listen, because
it's hard for me too.
He is the man and is a legend in the industry, and so knowledgeable that it's humbling. If you have an opportunity to look at his work, his writings, listen to him speak, he's an amazing person.
Yes, I full agreement. So happy birthday, Dr. Floyd Tool.
How old is he?
I don't know. I don't ask these things, but he seems very energetic. Let's just say that. When I emailed you, you had some questions here, like some common questions, and I thought it might be interesting to kind of go over some of these. maybe our audience might know some of this, but maybe if you're new and this is the first time you've ever tuned in and you trying to figure out how to tune your subs or what subs to get, things like that, maybe we can cover some
We
of.
got a lot of technical questions, and frankly, you know, for the normal user, if you open up the manual on your AVR and try and decipher it, it's just your eyes glaze over and it's mumbo jumbo. So we know how to cut through all of that noise and what matters and what doesn't in the setup. And also, you know, I'm sure you guys have seen it. You're on auto setup, and as good as it is, it makes mistakes sometimes that need to be corrected. So we see a lot of that. And also misunderstanding of terms and what actually is happening with base management. So that's a lot of our tech topics surround base management.
Or Chana, do you want to share your experience? What happened with your sub?
My big boo boo. So I had run DRAC, and I have the PB 1000 Pro. And so, you know, everything was sounding good, and then that was in this room, and then I was messing around with our toolkit and the crossover section where it'll just play tones, and it'll go from 260 down to like 16 hertz, so you can see where to put the crossover. And I was just like, man, there's this big suck out at like 80 hertz. I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? You know, and I had the subwoofer off because, you know, trying to do it like full range, and then I realized, yeah, my subwoofer was not set up properly. Like that's why there's a big old problem. I didn't turn on the app. my subwoofer wasn't set to LFE or 120. It was set to 60 hertz. And I was like, oh, no wonder. No wonder
the low pass
wrong.
Turned on at 60. Yeah, that'll cause a problem.
Yeah. So no, it was very eye-opening. I'm like, damn, now I gotta run everything again.
Yeah, that's a common one too, Joe. Where do I set the low pass on my subwoofer? Well, is it a 2-channel system where it's sending a full range signal, or is it an AV processor where it's already been low passed? That's a common one too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting because automatic room correction wouldn't tell you that. It wouldn't say, hey, there's an issue here. Your sub seems like there's something wrong with your sub. Just lets it do it.
Yeah, and it just does its thing, right? Yeah.
Right. It would see a low pass in the system and say, okay, that's the best the subwoofer can do, and it would equalize up to 60 and then allow it to roll off. It wouldn't try and force the issue and overcome the low pass. So you gotta be careful about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, before we go into some of the questions that you brought up in the email, let's go backwards. Let's start with a complicated question, a complex one or advanced one. Okay. And then, you know, normally we start from easy and go up, but let's start with this one here. Thank you for the super chat. How do I say this? Bader Al Mansour.
There you go. Sound looks good to me.
Thank you for the super chat. And he says, what is your thoughts and Sir Ed Mullen on MSO multi-sub woofer optimization, pros and cons versus REW software with 2 SVS PB16 subwoofers and proud owner? All right.
You know, we're seeing more and more usage of MSO. It's a very powerful program. It's about as automated as it can get, and it delivers fantastic results. I think it really comes into its own when you're doing 3 and 4 subwoofers, where the solution becomes rather complex, and you're looking at individual frequency responses and how all the subs are interacting and the standing wave profile in the room. With 2 and Room EQ Wizard really, I think, is the standard bearer in the industry right now. It's what everybody's running. Room EQ Wizard is a little bit less automated and a little bit more hands-on. It allows you to use your own PEQ filters or maybe something from Mini DSP if you want to use an external correction. And you know, with 2 subwoofers, I think you could get away with Room EQ Wizard and phasing the 2 subs and the onboard PEQs that we offer. There's 3 PEQs per subwoofer. So I like Room EQ Wizard simply because I'm more hands-on, and I like to look at what happens when I do this, what happens when I implement this PEQ, or what happens when I set the phase to a certain frequency. How do the 2 subs interact with each other? What happens? So it's a little bit more learning for me, which I enjoy, but there's no doubting the power of MSO, and I'm seeing it used more and more in complex setups.
Yeah, and for the folks who don't know, MSO is multi-sub optimizer, and it's a free software for Windows currently. And basically, it asks you to take measurements of each subwoofer from each of your seats, and the goal is to try to make the seat-to-seat consistency as close as possible. So the tough thing is, a lot of times you'll optimize for the sub or the bass response in a single position, and then you move over a few seats, and maybe it's not optimal there. And so this software can adjust each individual subwoofer it'll adjust the PEQs for each one, the delay, what else, and levels.
Yep.
So it's kind of weird. You wouldn't be able to do it yourself. It's like a brute force type of thing. It just tries all these different combinations to see what gives you the most consistent response.
It's very powerful, and props to the individuals who wrote the programming in it. And you actually bring up a good point, Joe. I'm actually a fan often. If let's say it's your system and you've invested all the money and you sit in the sweet spot, right? And you want everything perfect for you. We've all seen when you move the microphone to a different seat, how the frequency response changes drastically in the room. And that's just, you're moving through the standing wave pattern and the peaks and nulls. And, if you're running auto setup and you measure at the sweet spot, then you move over 3, 4, 5 feet, or even behind you to a separate row, what happens? Well, the frequency response changes considerably. So what does auto setup try to do? It tries to do what MSO is doing, which is develop some type of aggregate solution that works reasonably well at all the seats. But if you think about it, at the expense of the sweet spot, it will never be as good at the sweet spot if you measure in 5 or 6 different locations than if you measure only in the sweet spot.
And we don't want the the mother-in-law chair to be better than the sweet spot.
Exactly.
Right?
So oftentimes my advice is, you can try it both ways, but if you measure 1, 2, 3 in the sweet spot, I can almost guarantee you're going to get better sounding and better measuring results at the expense of the other locations. But hey, who cares? It's your family member. It's your guest. They're going to have a great experience anyway. They're going to love it. They won't know the difference, but you will. So that's a little bit of a different perspective that I wanted to share. Is sometimes you can be a little bit selfish and maximize the response at your listening position, and maybe not worry so much about who is it, Aunt Tilly in the background.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I have 4 theater chairs, and the number of times that all of them were filled, I could count on my one hand. It's usually me watching a movie late at night when everybody's sleeping, and I turn it up, and I enjoy it.
It's got to be you, right? You want it to be the best for you.
Did you scoot it over so that one chair is just directly?
Oh, I should. I need to just make that one center. Yeah, but for me, it's more of a perfectionist thing. If I know that I can make it good at all of them, you're
gonna try.
I'm gonna try, and so MSO allows me to not compromise. I can make it good for mine and everybody else's if that ever happens. But
if it's possible, it can do it. But sometimes, you move a couple feet. Like in my own reference theater around the corner, I have a massive null, like 3 feet behind me. It's at 42 hertz. It's like 15 or 17 dB deep. It's bad. It's a front to rear standing wave null. It's very persistent. When I discovered it, I said, okay, I'm not sitting here. And I moved my seat up 3 feet and reconfigured the locations of the speakers in the room. And my bass response is awesome. But if I lean back too far or move my chair back a couple feet, wow, the mid bass is gone.
Yeah, that's funny. I had this guy who was like a hi-fi guy, and he didn't really have any subs. He didn't believe in any DSP stuff. But I brought my U mic, and he had all this expensive gear, and all this bass traps and all this stuff, all kinds of stuff. And I did some measurements, and I realized that he was sitting in a null, and just moving the chair 1.5 feet forward would bring him out of that null.
Yeah.
And so it was just funny. $100 mic is all we needed to improve his sound. You probably didn't have to spend thousands of dollars on this one cable.
Right. There's sort of a hierarchy of the way you approach this, and mine is you better check all the spots in the room first before you settle on a location. A lot of times someone will come to us with this predetermined setup and say, everything has to go here. And I have to sit there. Okay. Then your hands are sort of tied, because if it doesn't measure well with that setup, then you're kind of stuck with it. Because you can't change the room dimensions. And generally you can't change the speaker locations because they're sort of defined by the video display and the surround back, overhead, high channels, whatever. But oftentimes you can move the subwoofer if you have some flexibility. And boy, that spot's terrible. Let's try that one over there, or this one here, or one maybe in the back corner. And bam, you find a spot that measures pretty darn well without a really big null. Nulls are the worst, as you know. We can deal with peaks a little bit easier than nulls, but if there's a big null there, I just line through that location. Hey, that's just a bad spot, dude. You don't want to put your subwoofer there.
Nick can just sell.
That's it.
Nick can just sell them more subs then. In that case, in that one spot, then let's just more subs. Then we'll fix it right up.
Think about this, Joe. If you got a spot with a null and you put a subwoofer in another part of the room, and you can fill in that null, so to speak, right? Because that other sub doesn't have a null at that frequency. Well, it looks good on the frequency response chart, doesn't it? But what are you still missing? You're missing the dynamic output of the first subwoofer, which has a massive null at that frequency that never changes. So you say, look at the combined dynamic output of the system. It's going to be lower over that bandwidth where the null exists than it would be everywhere else where both subs are contributing max. So when you really start pushing the system hard and you're like, oh, it's not hitting in the mid bass like I expected it would, that's because one of them has a null and it's not contributing. And that's never going to go away.
That's why I use MSO though. You could have like, all right, that one, you do what you do. This guy, you take over in this null, and then what I'm saying?
That's again though, if there's a null, there's a null, and you're going to get lower output there, and that's never going to change. It's just the acoustics of the room. So I always try and not put the sub in a null to start, and then we deal with peaks more easily.
I think what you said is also, it seems like make sure that your seat is not in a null.
Yeah,
your actual.
Well, that's what I meant. Yeah, sure.
What can you do? You just gave me an idea. Maybe those unused seats, I should just put subs on both sides. Huh?
There it is.
You can move the listening position sometimes, but oftentimes, again, you want to sit where the speakers and the video display are optimal, but you can move the sub a lot more easily. So that's usually what we end up doing.
So, well, right here it says subwoofer placement, best place to start, and the methodology. What are some good places? If you had to guess, here's a room. I don't know everything about it, but where?
I'm a little bit older than you guys, so I'm going to date myself. But back in the day, everybody said, "Don't stick the sub in a corner because it's going to sound boomy." Is there some validity to that? Maybe. If you put the sub in a corner, you might get a standing wave peak where it doesn't exist somewhere else. But again, we can deal with peaks now a lot more easily than we could 30 years ago when EQ was a little bit more difficult to implement. But I always say start in a corner, because a corner placement will excite every standing wave pattern in the room. There's 5 different types of standing wave patterns in the room. Corner placement excites all of them. That gives you the densest standing wave pattern. Now, is it possible placing the sub in a corner ends up where you're sitting? Is there a null? Maybe. But again, you're going to have a denser standing wave pattern and a higher chance of not encountering a null when you start with a corner. If you have EQ, great, because if there's a peak in the response, we can knock it out. But if you place the sub, say, for example, in the middle of the wall, middle of the front wall, middle of the side wall, you're creating a standing wave pattern between that sub and the side walls where it wouldn't otherwise exist if it was actually in the corner. So then the potential starts to increase for seeing mid and upper bass nulls that are created between the sub and the side walls, or the sub and the opposite wall, where it wouldn't exist if it was corner loaded. So I always say start in a corner, see how it looks, see how it measures, see how it sounds. If we need to move it, fine. But that's where I start.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I like to recommend just throw it in the corner. It's going to give you extra bass. Like that's just extra, you know. You can tame it afterwards, like you said. But I think it's a great place to start. And how about in addition to that, let's say, all right, for some reason they're not going to put in the corners. Maybe it's maybe the space doesn't allow for it. What's maybe another good option? And
if we talking one sub or two,
let's just say two subs, like because I see some people putting it about like a quarter of the way or 2/3 of the way, just because it looks nice. You know, they have their floor standing speakers and they have their TV, and then they put it right in between. Is that a good spot?
Well, you know, there's something to be said for visual symmetry on the front stage, right? Everybody likes, oh yeah, I got my mains, I got my center, I got my two subs up here. If they're corner loaded, I think that's optimal. We've seen all seen the Harman International, you know, Todd Welty measurements. 1/4 in or 1/3 in tends to measure pretty well. But again, the farther you get away from the sidewall, let's say they're in the corners, and then you start marching them in, and you're at the 1/4 or even the 1/3, 2/3 points. Do you have the potential to create a standing wave between the subwoofer and the sidewall, depending on the room size? Yes, you do. So as you start marching them away from the corners, and if you do have a microphone and Room EQ Wizard, you start to see ripples in the upper bass response that weren't there before. And that's because there's a new standing wave pattern that you've created because you're moving it away from the corner. Aside from visual symmetry, both subs on the front stage, you're never going to get rid of the front to rear standing wave null. And that is probably the most problematic that we encounter in the room. It's the most persistent, and it tends to be in the mid bass region where you're sitting. And I've seen sweeps. Hey, I got both subs on the front. Here's my Room EQ Wizard sweep. Wham. There's a 15 or 20 dB null at 45 hertz or 40 hertz or something like that. And we're like, wow, that's bad. Can you move this listening position forward or rearward? Not really. Well, okay, let's try opposite diagonal corners. That's my favorite setup for dual subs.
Okay.
You know, say front, left, right, rear, or front, right, left, rear. And the reason why is that addresses all 5 of the standing wave patterns in the room and gives you a higher chance of having a flatter frequency response at the listening position.
Would you say Gary would prefer one in each corner and maybe stacked all the way up to the ceiling?
Right. We'll stack all of them in all 4 corners.
Yeah. So how about this? What is a common null that you see in a lot of rooms?
The front to rear.
What frequency approximately would that be?
Well, it depends on the dimensions of the room, as you know. But say you're looking at a standard room, maybe 15 feet wide by 22, 23 feet long. That's sort of a standard living room, family room, media room type, maybe 2,500 cubic feet. That front to rear standing wave null will typically manifest in the middle of the room. It's in the mid bass region, 40, 45, 50 hertz. And it can be nasty sometimes. It can be very persistent and very deep. I think the worst I ever saw was 27 dB deep at 42 hertz. I mean, it was like a black hole.
Wow.
Really bad. And the room was well constructed. That was the problem. It was a very well constructed, rigid boundaries, block walls, concrete floor. I'm like, man, this thing really reflects bass extremely well. And that's your problem. Because the reflected bass is almost as strong as the bass coming out of the sub. And boy, what a massive cancellation in the middle of the room. And that was with both subs up front. Yeah. And we did opposite diagonal corners. Then the null was still there, but it was smaller. And then we did some phasings. We started just 15-degree increments, 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, and so forth. Mm-hmm. When we were done without EQ, it was 18 to 110 hertz, plus or minus 2 dB in room.
Wow.
We got lucky. But it does demonstrate the power of measurements placement, phasing, and understanding room acoustics.
Yeah, I've seen a lot that are of main speakers, like floor standing speakers, bookshelf speakers, and a lot of times I'll see like a null in the 70 to 80 hertz region. I'm like, oh man, I don't know, that's a tricky area because that's where I usually want to cross over. But we wouldn't know this stuff unless we did, some more in-depth measurements.
Is it just the speakers, or is the speaker subwoofer combined? Because a lot of times we will see a suck out with the combined response, the speaker and the subwoofer. And then we say, okay, is this the speaker? Is it the subwoofer? Is it the speaker plus the subwoofer? And now we got to start breaking it down into individual components. It could also be both speakers interfering with each other. If they're a certain distance apart, you get bass cancellation between the two speakers. So are we measuring both speakers? Are we measuring one? Is it the speaker only? Is it the sub only? Is it speaker plus sub? You can learn a lot, Joe, by breaking it down into individual components and say, let's measure front left speaker, measure front right speaker, then measure the subwoofer alone. And then let's measure front left and sub, front right and sub, and see what happens as you start adding in components. And then, all of a sudden that suck out appears, but now you know where it is and where it came from and why it's there. And then you can start working on ways to eliminate it.
Yeah, so here I have on the screen, it says REW taking in-room measurements of the subwoofer, how to interpret the data, what the standing wave peaks and nulls are, and how to compensate for them. So this is coming from our email.
Yep. This is a perfect example of what we were just talking about. A lot of times the Room EQ Wizard user will be using front left or front right as the channel, and it includes the loudspeaker, and they don't realize that the loudspeaker is part of the combined frequency response. And I say, okay, if you don't have the REW plugin, REW plugin, where you can pick individual channels, and you're stuck with front left or front right, set your crossover, set that front channel to small, and set the crossover to like 200 hertz. So it's not interfering with your measurements, and you really are looking at just the subwoofer. Because if the loudspeaker is playing and maybe you're running a 60 hertz or an 80 hertz crossover, and there's some wonkiness or weirdness or phase cancellation or anomalies in the mid bass or upper bass, we don't know if that's the loudspeaker or the subwoofer. So we need to break it down, isolate it, set the crossover really high so the front channel's not contributing at all, and then start looking at, all right, now we're looking at just the subwoofer. And if it doesn't look good, and again, my hierarchy is if there's a null, a bad one, and you need to sit there, well, let's start moving the subwoofer around until we find a more benign looking frequency response. And then we can start looking at EQ. But why would you EQ a location that had a huge null in it? It's counterproductive.
Yeah.
You're never going to get anywhere. So, hey, let's move the sub around. This doesn't look good. Let's try spots 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And when we find the best spot, then we start looking at layering on PEQs and phasing if necessary.
Yeah, I see a lot of people try to overpower the nulls. They just figure, I'm just going to add more. And I don't know if they understand what's causing the null.
Exactly. Usually it's room acoustics. It's a cancellation null. Even if you've ever looked at before and after plots, like from Odyssey or anything else that gives you a before and after plot, you'll notice even Odyssey will not boost a null because it knows that you can't. So it'll boost around the null, but it leaves a very narrow. It's less audible afterwards, but Odyssey has null recognition in it, and so does some of the other auto setup programs. So it doesn't try to boost the center frequency of the null because it's counterproductive. It just doesn't work.
Even in REW, if you try to use their EQ, it's not going to try to do anything too crazy in the bass, especially. Actually, we have a test here. We have like pink noise tests, and the advantage to using our toolkit quick plug is that we can isolate LFE at least. So we can tell somebody play LFE, and we know when they play LFE, it's only going to be LFE.
You got that right.
Kind of helpful.
And again, that gets back to the plugin in Room EQ Wizard. If you do run the plugin or using I think the latest version has it built in.
Mhm.
You can actually pick what channel you want. And you can pick, it says subwoofer, but as you know, it's the LFE channel. You're sending out it's a PCM signal that's encoded, that the AV processor recognizes it as the LFE channel, and it plays through the subwoofer. Then you don't have to worry about are the front channels contaminating the response or affecting the response, because it's just LFE.
Right. And just a quick note about RAW. I don't know if it's on every AVR, but on Denon and Marantz, I noticed that the LFE and center are switched. So make sure that when you're playing that, because their assignment is like 1 is left, 2 is right, 3. I don't know exactly how they have it. It could be either center or LFE, depending on what you have it connected to.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. And also you can't do it the other way. So if you play something that's only in the left channel and you play it through your AVR, if you have your crossover set to 80, it'll still activate the subwoofer.
Yeah. So right, if that speaker's set to small, or it has a crossover of 80, then it's gonna split the signal between the two, and you're gonna get output from the speaker. How many times have we seen a suck out between the speaker and the subwoofer just because they're literally out of phase with each other over the crossover bandwidth that they're sharing? So time aligning the speaker and the sub doesn't necessarily result in the smoothest frequency response between the two, because there could be phase cancellation present, because the speaker and the subwoofer don't have the same phase response. If you look at, say, how a crossover network's designed, and you've got this uniform high pass, low pass, it's the same slope on both sides, and we try and get the phase response very similar over the crossover bandwidth, and we end up with a nice flat transition from driver to driver. That's the idea in the room, but it rarely works well, because you've got asymmetrical slopes. The AV processor is applying a 12 dB high pass to the speakers. It's applying a 24 dB low pass to the subwoofer. So right away, you've got asymmetry that you're dealing with. And then even if you time align the speaker and the subwoofer, that's not the same as saying, oh, they both have the same phase response. So what if the loudspeaker and the subwoofer have a different phase response over the bandwidth that they're sharing, and they have different slopes for the high pass and the low pass? It's a recipe for an uneven frequency response. It's just something we got to live with, Joe. I've just never seen a perfect transition from a speaker to a subwoofer for all the channels at the same time. And some people get hung up on, they're like, oh, I got front left to sub good, center to sub good, right to sub looks terrible, surround to sub looks terrible, height to sub looks terrible. I'm like, pick your poison. Yeah, I say if you get the front channels reasonably well integrated with the sub, you're doing okay.
Yeah, you can't win them all, right?
You can't win them all. So let's pick the ones that matter the most, and that's the front stage.
Yep.
Yeah, I wish all of them had some kind of all pass filter where you could do a phase rotation. Get the timing set and then just rotate the phase on all of them and get them all aligned. But
right,
that's something we
if you're using Room EQ, you can look at it and say, let me look at the phase response of the front left speaker and the subwoofer at the bandwidth that they're sharing, because I've got the crossover set there. It's never the same, Joe. Never the same.
Right. We have a lot of questions that we've started here, and we can kind of do a rapid fire thing at the end. So I know we're kind of jumping around from topic to topic, but they're all just interrelated. That's why. So earlier, so this is kind of you just talked about how timing and phase can be different. You can have the exact timing, but their phase relationship could be 180 degrees possibly.
Yep. Yeah. We've seen this before with auto setup. Let's say you have a sub in the front of the room and a sub in the back of the room, and you're running, I hate to pick on Odyssey all the time, but they do have discrete subs for XT32. So it time aligns the front sub and time aligns the back sub. And then it measures the combined response and applies EQ to the combined response. Well, what if time aligning both subs results in a null, a cancellation null between the two? Because of the distance they're apart, the dimensions of the room, where you happen to be sitting, bam, you created a null. Is Odyssey intelligent enough? Rhetorical question for you. Is Odyssey intelligent enough to say, I just created a null by literally time aligning the front sub and the back sub relative to the listening position? The answer, no. It doesn't say I'm going to try 1 foot delta different, 2 foot delta different, 3 foot delta different. And that's really where either your mini DSP comes into play, or you can use the phase control and say, I'm going to start applying some phase rotation to the sub in the back. And what's the idea? I mean, do we want the peaks and nulls overlapping, or do we want them to interlace? If they interlace, then your frequency response is smoother, and that's the goal. You're losing a little bit of headroom, but you're gaining a smoother frequency response because you're interlacing those peaks and nulls, and that's the idea. So actually putting the subs out of phase a little bit, strategically driven by Room EQ Wizard, can actually result in better frequency response than just saying, hey, Odyssey, you deal with it, and just time align both subs.
Well, that's interesting because, if I had to choose between both subs playing at the exact same impulse, exact same time, but not hearing anything because I'm in a null, versus maybe they're slightly off, which I wouldn't probably be able to perceive for the most part. But I could actually hear the bass. I'd rather hear the bass. And another interesting thing is I spoke with somebody who just bought, he has 4 SB3000s, so he just bought 2 more. And he said one of the first things that you guys recommended to him was to adjust the phase before you run anything first. So get them set up and then adjust it so that they sound as loud as possible together, that you're getting some summation. And then you can run.
Right. That's going to be, if I have Room EQ Wizard, then I say start them all at 0 phase, and let's measure 1, 2, 3, and 4 independently. Then measure the front set, then measure the rear set, then turn all 4 of them on at once. And again, you're looking at what happens when I start introducing these variables into the room. And if introducing the rear set of subs results in cancellation that wasn't there before, well, then we say, okay, there's some phase cancellation depending on the room size and where you're measuring. So let's start applying some phase delay to the subs in the back of the room and see if we can reduce the magnitude of that phase cancellation, which speaks to your point. Are they going to be do we want the peaks to be on top of each other where you're getting max SPL, or do we want to offset them a little bit where you're getting the smoothest frequency response? I say frequency response is king. Don't worry about, if you wanted max SPL, you just stick them all in the same corner, right? They're all in phase with each other. Well, what's the benefit? The benefit is you're getting plus 6 dB every time you go from 1 to 2, and then you go from 2 to 4. You're getting 6 more dB of headroom, but you're not changing the frequency response at all. You're stuck with what the room has given you. If we split them up in the room, we lose a little bit of headroom, but we gain the opportunity to integrate the phase responses in a manner that gives us the smoothest combined frequency response.
That makes sense. Yep. Yeah, usually what I do is I just play some full range, or not full range, some pink noise that has some bass in it, and I play it on all of them, and I just make sure that they're at least about the same level, somewhat the same level, and that they're not fighting each other. Yeah. Because I know that Odyssey cannot do phase rotation. So if they're fighting each other, it's not a great place to start. So that's kind of how I do it. You mentioned something earlier also about large versus small settings on the AVR. I mean, if somebody's new, they might not understand, like, what is this for?
Those terms go all, updating myself again, those terms go all the way back to the origin of THX. And that would be actually a separate discussion. We can always drill into it deeper later if you want, or on another episode. But suffice it to say, what does small mean now? Small means that you can apply a crossover to that channel. Large means it's getting a full band, full range signal. And even if the speaker, let's say you're running a decent sized tower up front, is that tower, another rhetorical question, is that tower truly full range? Can it get down to 20 hertz or even 15?
Probably not, depending on how much you spent, but
probably not, right? So what's a typical low end response of even a big floor standard?
I'd say somewhere between 40, 35.
Yeah.
Sometimes they go to 30.
right? So you're missing a whole octave at that point. Let's say it rolls off at 35 hertz in room, and you want 15 hertz in room. That's a little bit more than a whole octave deeper. So not even large bass capable speakers, physically large, should not be set to full range because they're not capable of digging as deep as what could be on the soundtrack. Have we ever seen really deep bass mixed into the speaker channels? Sure. I've seen it before. It's bizarre. I've seen bass mixed down to 15 hertz in the center channel before. Loud encoding levels. How do you think the center channel would like it if you sent it a couple 100 watts at 20 hertz? It wouldn't. You could damage it, right? You could blow it. I've seen that before. So we always say, set your speakers to small, even if they're physically large and bass capable, and then apply a crossover to those speakers. The crossover really reflects the bass capabilities of the speaker. If it's a larger speaker, we end up with a deeper crossover, 40 hertz or 60 hertz. If it's a medium-sized speaker, maybe 60 to 80 hertz. If it's a smaller speaker, 80 to 100. And if it's really small, we might end up at 120.
120
but
to 150.
The point is, we can't apply a crossover to any speaker that's set to large, gets a full range signal. And that's why we don't like seeing that in the system. So if your AVR has those terms and you run auto setup and any of them come back at large, change it to small, and that allows you to assign a crossover to that channel. The bass in that channel then gets routed to the subwoofer at the crossover frequency, so the sub can help out, takes the load off the speakers, takes the load off the AVR. The AVR has more mid and upper frequency power for dynamics. It also runs cooler as well, and then you won't blow your speakers.
Hey, Sean, on the newer Denon and Marantz stuff, do they still use large and smaller, or did they change that up?
Yeah, I mean, I could check it out on the Marantz.
That's a great question. We just covered that. Every week we have a sort of a huddle with my team, and that came up very recently.
Yeah.
Hey, wow, this is a big one. Denon and Marantz appear to be getting away from the terms large and small, which is to their credit. I never liked the terms. They're a carryover. Yamaha, Pioneer, Sony, they still all use it. Onkyo got away from it years ago, and they just said either it's got a crossover or it's full band, one or the other. That makes more sense to people.
Yeah, I think Sean is pulling it up right now. I think it does say, what does it say right there?
It does it just says front center.
It's tracking your face.
Yeah, you might be.
There you go. Let's see. I can't really tell, but what does it say on there?
Well,
it says
frequencies.
Front, it just says front and then 80, and then I can change it. I have to go all the way down for it to say full range. So they've taken away the small, large,
which is
and this is in the newest update
or full range.
Yeah,
it's a good thing. It's less confusing, and they were superfluous terms. Either it's got a crossover or it doesn't. If it doesn't, it's full range. It makes way more sense. Onkyo was doing that 7 or 8 years ago when they got away from it, and some of the smaller manufacturers never use those terms either. When was the last time you saw that in Anthem's, Arc Genesis? They don't use those terms.
No,
and that's to their credit. They say, here's the crossover.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. It's one more thing to teach your team, though.
But we will be dealing with large and small for decades because there's legacy products out there that are going to be hanging around in the marketplace, and they're going to be out there for a long time. So we're still going to be running into it. We still need to understand what it means, and so we can give people the best advice.
Okay, so
and I mean, what's kind of worse? You okay over there, Joe?
I don't think it's me.
What's kind of bad about this new update with the Denon and Marantz is that, people will have the older models, and if you're saying like, hey, my Denon's this and that, and then you go and try and help them, and they got a fully different menu system. Now you're like, oh crap.
Well, that's why the guidance to my team was, if it's a newer AVR, pull up the owner's manual, get into the manual setup section, and see what the terminology is so you can give them the correct guidance. You can't assume anymore that Denon Marantz will always use the terms large and small.
Right.
It's a change.
So just have it. Hey, you got to have like a little spreadsheet. Everyone's 3700, 6700, and prior are going to be large, small, and it's going to have the speaker config screen because they took that away too.
Yep, they did.
And that's one of the things that was always troubling to a lot of people is like they go into Ampersand, they put on some new height channels, and they're like, I don't get any sound out of my height channels. Go into speaker config. So they combined it now in the new one with in the Ampersand area, the speaker configuration is also there.
It's now one and the same. And again, if you think about it, it's an intelligent change. It makes sense.
Yep, it does.
And to the layperson, they're like, all right, where are your speakers? What's in the system? Where are they located? And it assigns the amp channels accordingly.
Yeah. So we have a few topics here that maybe we could kind of combine. I know you've already touched on some of this, but this one says the best speaker subwoofer crossover frequency for each channel and what's happening in the signal. We've kind of, did we touch on this yet? Double bass, no. LFE plus mains.
Yeah.
Also the 0.1. I guess we could, which one do you want to do first out of these?
Well, I see a question here from one of your viewers. What's the best crossover for Prime Pinnacle, for example? So what actually happens in the system when we apply a crossover? Well, the AV processor applies a high pass filter to that speaker channel at the crossover frequency. And unless it's adjustable, which is very rare, it's a 12 dB per octave high pass filter. Now we say, well, how does the bass get to the subwoofer for that channel? It takes a duplicate signal for that channel. So let's say we're looking at front left, Prime Pinnacle, 60 hertz crossover, 60 hertz high pass on the speaker. And then that signal gets sent to the subwoofer output jack, and it gets low passed at 60 hertz. It's a 24 dB per octave on the low pass side. So that's how the speaker subwoofer crossover works for all of the speaker channels. So no matter what the crossover setting is, you're high passing the speaker, you're sending a duplicate signal to the subwoofer for that channel, you're low passing it at the same frequency, again, 1224 slope. And then, of course, we've got the LFE channel, which is a standalone channel on the soundtrack. So all of that gets mixed together and sent out the subwoofer output jack.
Wow. Yeah. So what is the LFE, the 0.1 channel? Like, what's the difference? Because on Den and Marantz, I see two places to set.
Can we just normalize how we talk about the LFE channel? Because I see all these people in the Facebook groups and I have a 7.4.6 Atmel setup. I'm like, can we just say? How
do you want to do it?
I already had an idea because I've been thinking about this. How about we try 7.1.4 is a channel configuration, but my speaker configuration is 7.4.6 or whatever. Right?
Yeah,
my speaker configuration.
You're so right. That has been a pet peeve of mine forever. I finally gave up on it.
Yeah, right.
The original meaning of let's say 7.1.4. What does that mean? Well, it's the audio channels in the system. How many subwoofers are in this? Who cares how many subwoofers are in the system? The LFE channel is one. There's one LFE channel in the soundtrack. So all the subs get the same signal. You could have 2, you could have 3, you could have 4. Doesn't matter. So the original intent of, say, 7.1.4, left, right, center, right surround, left surround, surround rear, the 2 surround rears, and 4 overheads, and the LFE channel.
And the one guy.
Yep. So people call it the subwoofer channel. It's not the subwoofer channel. It's the LFE channel.
And LFE stands for what, Ed?
Low frequency effects.
Low frequency effects. That's right.
It's a special channel in the soundtrack reserved for low frequency effects. Now, here's another rhetorical question. If you don't have a subwoofer specified in your system, where does the LFE channel go? Anybody know?
Oh,
nowhere.
Question.
So you're telling me if I set up a system with front, left, and right, center, and right surrounds, and I tell the AV processor I don't have a subwoofer.
Well,
Are you telling me that the LFE channel disappears?
No.
Yeah, when I play it on headphones, LFE just doesn't play at all.
Well, I know that the AVR is going to try and change your front, left, and right to full range.
It won't try. It will.
Yeah.
So the codec for decoding, the spec for decoding says if there's no subwoofer in the system, the LFE channel gets sent to the front channels, and they are forced to full range. To your point, they have to be on full range.
Yeah.
So the LFE channel doesn't just disappear. It's in the audio track. So that's why when people say, oh, it's a subwoofer channel, no, not really. It's the LFE channel. Let's call it what it is. It's a separate audio channel in the soundtrack reserved for low frequency effects. It is sent to the subwoofer if you have one specified in the system.
That's interesting.
If you don't, it's sent to the fronts.
I'll have to test that on my system to see if that's actually what happens, because on headphones it's different. On headphones, it just, if there's no if it's on headphones, it just doesn't play LFE. On our test tracks, when it says we do a call out 7.1.4, 9.1.6 call out, and when it says LFE, just nothing happens.
Yeah, well,
my headphones can go down to, I think they say 5 hertz or something ridiculous.
Should check on it. Check on your own system and see how it's routed. But that's the Dolby spec, that's where the LFE channel goes if you don't have a sub specified. So everybody sees this under bass in the Denon and Marantz, LPF for LFE. Well, what the heck does that mean, right? And the default is 120. It's the low pass for the LFE channel. So let's assume there is a subwoofer in the system. The LFE channel is only sent to the subwoofer, and you're telling the AV receiver low pass the signal for the LFE channel at 120 hertz,
right?
And don't allow it to play higher.
And if there's any confusion out there, a low pass filter is very simple. It lets the lows pass. Just think about it that way. If you hear high pass filter, it lets the highs pass. Low pass filter lets, somebody actually just commented on one of my videos yesterday saying, wait a second, if you set this to 120 and then your speaker to 60, aren't you missing 60 hertz of bass? I'm like, no, you've got it backwards.
And that's the thing. The speaker subwoofer crossover frequency is completely different than the low pass for the LFE channel, because the LFE channel is its own entity. It's not shared with any of the speakers. If there's a subwoofer in the system, it goes to the subwoofer. So the reason it on these Denon and Marantz, you say, well, I can adjust it from 80 all the way up to, I think, 250. I'm going from memory, right? Does it go that high?
I can try it right now.
But why would you set it to 80 if there's content in the LFE channel at 100 or 120? Because if you set it to 80, you're discarding that content. It's actually in the soundtrack, doesn't go anywhere. You're telling the receiver, you know what? Don't play anything in the LFE channel over 80 hertz. Right. Well, what if the mixing engineer mixed something in there at 110 or 120? Because that's been the historical mixing standard for decades for the LFE channel. How high do we want to mix in the LFE channel? 120. Why? Well, it's going to become obviously directional if we go much higher than that. Yeah. And most of the time, there's nothing in the LFE channel really above 80. But every now and then, if you look at a soundtrack, you'll see it. You'll see some upper bass in there. So my recommendation is leave it at 120, because you're not truncating or lopping off content that could be in the soundtrack. There's not really any reason to set it to 80. There's this evergreen debate on AVS forum about it. Well, if I set it to 80, the subwoofer's less localizable. Okay, that's true, because you're telling it not to play above 80, but you're also discarding content that's in the soundtrack. So you might like it better, but I wouldn't call it more accurate. There's a difference.
Right.
I'd like to hear it if it's in the soundtrack. I'll take my chances on localization.
So if you have it set to 120 and you have your other speakers set to 80 hertz, it'll still play from 120 hertz and below.
Yeah, because that setting only affects the LFE channel. Yeah. That's why it's in the bass menu. It's totally independent from the speaker subwoofer crossover frequency for all the other speaker channels. And that's why it's separate. It's a separate menu setting. That is a point of confusion for a lot of a lot of users is, what the heck does this mean? And how if I noodle around with this, what happens? Well, it only affects the LFE channel. Has nothing to do with the speaker subwoofer crossover.
Doesn't have anything to do with the bass, right?
So basically set it to 120 and never change it ever again after that.
That's my recommendation.
Done.
All right.
And you're right. It the new Marantz goes up to 250 and the lowest is 80.
This is what we should do, Chana, on our next project. Let's just put some hidden messages like at like 250 hertz in the LFE only.
Into the LFE.
You're right. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
If you set it to 250, you're going to hurt anything? No, because there's nothing in the soundtrack.
Probably nothing there.
Right?
Yeah.
There's nothing there.
That idea.
So who cares if it's set to 250? The real
Hidden
problem
messages.
is if you set it to 80.
Hidden messages in the
Right out the
LFE
room.
Yeah, put an Easter egg in there
from 200 to 250 hertz.
That's awesome, man. We have a super chat right here, so let's get to that real quick. So Benji Gator 23 says, well, first of all, thank you for the super chat. And he says, when phase aligning two PB3000s with a mini DSP, is it better to use the phase adjustment knob in the SVS app or delay setting in mini DSP?
So let's, really boils down to, I would say try it both ways and see which results in a better looking combined frequency response. When you apply a time delay, you're stacking the entire signal up in the time domain. When you're adjusting the phase control has the most effect at a certain frequency and progressively less effect at deeper frequencies. It is a broadband control, but it is to some extent frequency dependent. And let's say you apply, 90 degrees of phase rotation at 80 hertz. Is that going to give you 90 degrees of phase rotation at 20 hertz? No, it won't. And that's the difference between a phase rotation or phase delay and a time delay. So it depends on what's happening in the room, the frequency response, the acoustics of the room. I say if you have a mini DSP, try it both ways. You can apply different time delays to the front or rear sub, and then you can try different phase delays as well and see which one measures better. In the end, frequency response is king. So the best idea wins.
So that's interesting. When you adjust the phase, I was under the assumption that it was just adding delay to the entire thing. But no, you're saying it's actually a phase or frequency dependent.
It's frequency dependent.
Wow. Okay. I'm learning something new. That's awesome.
Here's a good one that we tried one time. We had two subwoofers outdoors, ground plane, no reflective boundaries at all. And we had the phase set to 0 on both of them. And then we set the phase to 180 on one of them. And as you would expect, there was phase cancellation between the two. We had them right next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Then we set the phase back to 0 on both of them. And we actually reversed the signal polarity and said, all right, we're going to just make positive, negative. It's literally a 180 degree reversal of the polarity of the signal.
Mm-hmm.
They did not measure the same. You would think, setting the phase to 180 and reversing the polarity would result in the same exact thing. It doesn't. And the reason why is polarity literally was a complete reversal of the signal, whereas phase was a phase rotation that's to some extent frequency dependent. The biggest difference we saw was at the deepest frequencies.
Huh.
Yeah, it was a pretty cool experiment.
Very interesting. We have another super chat here. Project X.
We just talked about this.
Exactly.
Since LFE is only single mono data, should the 0.1 in 9.1.4 ever be presented as 9.2.4?
Well, I would say it in layman's terms, it has come to be known as the number of subwoofers in your system. I'm sick of fighting it. I'm sick of swimming upstream. Okay, great. I'm running a 9.4.4. I got 4 subs in the system. I got it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, it's never going to be 9.0.4, can it? I guess it can, huh?
Yeah,
if
you can.
You don't have any subs.
Well, no. Well, yeah, because what
I
did that originally mean? It meant the LFE channel. It was how many audio channels are in the system, not how many speakers are in the system. That was the difference back when Dolby came up with this. It really originally meant the number of channels, not the number of speakers.
I have a 9.16.6 or what?
Yeah. I heard a 13.8.8.
Right.
At Cedia.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But,
how many different LFE channels were there?
1.
8 or
There's
1?
only one. There's only one. There's only one.
Now it's gonna start getting tricky, Ed, because now you have the new Denon Marantz that have the directional bass. Now it's single LFE, but now you have actually like assignable different things for each channel. So I'm sure that'll be fun.
I'm sure SVS is like SVS.
You could have
like,
stereo bass, maybe. Stereo bass is not present in an AV processor because all the subs get the same signal.
Right.
Maybe we're moving it. I'd have to drill into it because I haven't seen it yet, but maybe you could have, it's actual stereo bass, for example. I don't know.
But as a subwoofer company, you're all about it, right? You guys everybody needs 4 subwoofers now.
You need hype bass.
It sure helps. It sure helps.
Sure helps.
Awesome.
What is this double bass? Did we already talk about this?
No. Double bass. That's another one that creates all kinds of problems. And again, Denon and Marantz having the extra adjustability makes it even more confusing. So what's double bass? We see this a lot. You run auto setup and it sets your fronts to large, meaning full band, right? And the system sounds great. And then you get around to playing some 2-channel music and guess what stops playing? The subwoofer. So we get customer calls up in a panic. Hey, my subwoofer doesn't work. It was working when I was watching the movie, but now it's not working. So it must be broken. Okay. Well, are your fronts set to large or full band? Well, yeah, they are actually. Well, that's why. Because if you're playing 2-channel music and the front channels are set to full band, what gets sent to the subwoofer?
Nothing.
Zip, nada, zilch, nothing. Enter in the concept of double bass. Oh, well, what if I want my speakers to play on full range, which we don't recommend, by the way, but what if I do, and I want the subwoofer to play at the same time? Okay, well, we can do that. There's a feature under the bass menu called LFE plus mains, which is more commonly referred to as double bass. I've seen it called plus. I've seen it called extra. What does it actually do? It only works when the front channels are set to full band, and it sends a duplicate signal to the subwoofer for the front channels, as if they were set to small. And
then you have triple bass,
right? And so that double bass signal in Denon and Marantz is adjustable. You can adjust the low pass for it, which is kind of interesting. So I say, all right, the fronts are set to full range. They're always set to full range, even if you turn on double bass. And then the sub gets a signal. Well, where do we low pass the subwoofer if we turn on low bass or double bass? Do we low pass it at 40, 60, 80, 100, 120? How much overlap do we want to create between the speakers on full range and the double bass signal being sent to the subwoofer? That's what that adjustable frequency is. And the weirdness, at least on all the legacy Denon and Marantz, you turn on double bass and the crossover reappears for the front channels. It's not a crossover at all. They're still playing on full range. What it should say is low pass for the double bass signal, but it doesn't say that.
Look at your face. I'm as confused as you, because hold on a second. I always thought that when you set that was actually just changing it so that the crossover on the mains.
Nope. No. Remember, when you set the mains to full range or large, they're always getting a full range signal.
Man.
And
no
then
wonder people are confused, huh?
Then you turn on double bass and the subwoofer starts getting sent a signal for the front channels, but the fronts are still set to large. So they're still getting a full range signal. So now the question is, well, how high do I want the double bass signal to play in the subwoofer? Do I want it to play at 40, 60?
Is it the rhetorical
80?
one again?
No, it's you can pick it. You can pick it. Yeah. You can pick the now, and if you don't have an adjustable double bass frequency in another AV processor, let's say it's a Pioneer or a Yamaha or Sony, that is a fixed double bass low pass. It's usually at 80.
It does say crossover here, full range.
It does full range and crossover, huh? So again, I hate to keep plugging our toolkit.
So that's a weird one. That's a weird one.
We have a test where we play the test tones and we just keep playing it maybe a third octave down. And so what we say is listen to your speakers and kind of get an idea how low they're playing in room, and maybe where they're not able to play bass, then let your sub take over if you want to use this particular feature. Maybe that would be the way to do it. Try to minimize the overlap. I don't know. I don't usually recommend.
You're right. You want to minimize the overlap. Well, let's get back to the original discussion on large and small. Do we want to run any speaker on full range? The answer is no, and we already talked about why. But if you're hell bent on playing that speaker on full range, say it's a decent sized towers, damn it, I paid for those speakers and I'm going to put them on full range. Then the question becomes, how much double bass do we want to send to the subwoofer, and how much overlap do we want to create between the speaker and the sub? And to your point, Joe, if you create too much overlap between the speaker and the sub, it can get boomy very quickly and tubby. And then also, this is a rhetorical question: what are the chances of the speaker and the sub having the same phase response at the overlap bandwidth? The chances is zero. So oftentimes double bass ends up sounding kind of bizarre. It sort of sounds vague, disembodied. Is it louder most of the time? Is it better? I would argue almost never. It sounds bizarre 99% of the time when I try it. So I just don't use it. But it is a confusing feature, and no one understands what it really does. So I thought it was a good one for your show.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, well, I think a lot of people just figure more bass. More bass
isn't better bass.
I got more bass.
I got more.
What you got back there, China? Let's see it.
So when I put I put the front.
You got too much bokeh, bro. You got your bokeh-licious over there,
man. Oh, maybe if I can. Now I gotta.
But I think you can see what you're saying. Maybe we could just pull it up on the screen. Maybe, I don't know.
No, because they won't do a capture card thing, because then it's a HDCP, that stupid nonsense.
Yeah.
But basically what happens is when I change my subwoofer output to LFE plus main, I get a bass extraction low pass filter.
There you go. So they're calling it now what it is, which is a low pass filter for the double bass signal being sent to the subwoofer. That was never called that before. They must be listening to me gripe about this, because they're making the changes that actually reflect reality, and it was never that way before.
You know what we can do is Tim can chop these up, right? All these topics, and then next time somebody has a question, they call in customer service. You can just say, here's the video.
I've got a link for you.
Here's the answer. We've talked about it. In addition to me explaining, here's another video.
Here's us griping about double bass and what it actually means.
We're not talking about a drum set that has two kick drums.
Okay, so I have some a few questions, and then we'll get to some of the questions from the chat here. But I hear a lot of audiophile guys, right, that say that, subwoofer, I don't like subwoofers because they're slow, the slow bass. Why are you laughing, bro?
They were just talking about this last week. It's like this idiots talking about fast subwoofer, slow subwoofer.
The bass was so fast it left the room. That's an old one from Tom Hussein at Sound Vision.
So fast it left the room. That's
so
clever.
fast.
I like that.
It's so the bass was so fast that 20 hertz was 200 hertz. Wow.
Right, exactly.
But so here's the thing: is I believe that what's actually happening is that a lot of the 2-channel guys don't have a way to delay their main speakers to keep up with the inherent delay of a subwoofer, because it has DSP processing and has some additional latency.
Boom.
And I would like to know about how much that would be. Let's say if I didn't want to do anything, I just wanted to kind of guess, add a certain amount of delay. What should I add for an SVS sub?
Well, first we say, does the audiophile even want to apply DSP to the front channels? Right. That's generally verboten. It's like, oh no, I can't do that. But to answer your question, if you're willing to apply DSP to the front channels and you want to compensate for the DSP latency in the amplifier, our DSP chipset runs maybe around 5 milliseconds, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And if you can convert that to feet, if you want, sound travels roughly at 1,100 feet per second, depending on how far above sea level you are. You can actually figure out what it is, and then you can figure out what the delay, what that actually translates to in physical distance. Say, okay, it's a 5.5 millisecond delay. Sound travels at 1,100 feet per second where I live, and that equates to however many feet. So that's the way to do it if you want to apply a delay and DSP processing to the front channels. The other thing to look at is when you say, is the subwoofer fast enough? We get into a discussion of, what's transient response? Well, if the subwoofer can play the signal, can play the frequency in question, it by definition has adequate transient response because it's playing the frequency, right? If it can't play the frequency, then it doesn't have sufficient transient response at that frequency, but it can play all of the frequencies in the bass bandwidth. So when we talk about subwoofer speed, really what we're talking about is the time domain behavior of the subwoofer. How long does the subwoofer hang around in the time domain after the signal stops? And can you hear that ringing, and do you perceive that as slow or plodding or overlapping with the beginning of the next note? That's really what the audiophile definition of subwoofer speed is. It's not how fast it starts. They all start at the same rate because they're playing the same frequency. It's how long it hangs around afterwards in the time domain. And then we get into, okay, sealed versus ported. And a properly designed sealed subwoofer generally does have better time domain behavior than a ported subwoofer, because the port has a slug of air in it that hangs around at the resonance tuning frequency of the port. And if you ever look at the time domain behavior of a ported subwoofer, you're going to see what hangs out the longest is the port tuning frequency. It's like the tail of the comet, we call it. So the whole thing slows down uniformly till you get to the port tuning system, and then the port hangs around a little bit longer. Can you hear that? Well, if the port's tuned to 20 hertz or deeper, probably not. If the port's tuned to 35 hertz, like we had maybe small brick and mortar subs back in the 80s, they were all uniformly horrible. Maybe you could hear it back then. I think ported subs got a bad reputation on music. One, because they were just crappy brick and mortar designs, just poor subwoofer designs, bad drivers, bad amps, high distortion, but they were also had a very high tuning frequency. So there's a lot of group delay and phase rotation in the audible music bandwidth. And you say, you know what, that sub really kind of sounds kind of slow, sloppy, overhang, plodding, whatever you want to call it, versus a properly designed sealed sub, got that stop on a dime bass. That's what people call it. Well, that's because it's not hanging around in the time domain.
Right. Okay. So then by what I'm gathering here, ported subwoofer is slower than a sealed subwoofer at the frequency because it hangs out.
They can hang around a little bit longer in the time domain, and that's it's.
And how much time are we talking about? Are we talking about fractions of a second, something that people won't actually notice?
At port tuning, sure. You might see 200, 300 milliseconds of time domain delay. Not delay, but it's just ringing.
It's just hanging out there.
Yeah, it's just hanging out there. So you look at, like, say, a waterfall chart and say, all right, let's look at the time behavior of this. It's nice and uniform, and then the port comes on, and you see that little tail of the comet come whirling out into the third axis, and say, okay, the port's hanging around. But if the port's tuned to 20 hertz or deeper, is it really audible? Not really.
Probably not.
And you can prove that. You can say, all right, let's look at the PB16 Ultra, for example, or one of our tunable subs. let's look at the group delay chart for sealed mode versus ported mode. Well, they're damn near the same all the way down to about 28 hertz, which means the phase delay, phase rotation, group delay, very similar down to 28 hertz. That's kind of below the music bandwidth, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we say a properly designed ported subwoofer with the tuning frequency pushed way down deep will have very similar time domain behavior as a sealed subwoofer, at least down into the upper 20s. And then they're going to start to diverge. And then really you're just looking at the differences in the design. What does a ported sub bring to the table that a sealed sub doesn't at the deepest frequencies? More output.
So, so I just was looking on this calculator. So what, 5 milliseconds, would that equal what, about 6 feet? Is that right?
Yep, somewhere in that range, sure.
So if you have to guess. So here's the thing, though. I think that what's happening with the audiophile guys is maybe they're perceiving that delay.
They can hear it. They can totally hear it. Those
Can you hear
milliseconds.
You think you can hear? I think 6 feet of difference. If you were to place a sub 6 feet difference, I mean, there might be some different things that happen.
Well, if you think, and let's take it one step further, Joe. What happens if we say, okay, let's compensate for the pure DSP latency of the amp, and we're going to put the subwoofers 6 feet ahead of the speakers, and say, all right, we've compensated for that. Does that necessarily take into account? We touched on this earlier. Does that take into account the differences in phase response between the speaker and the subwoofer? The answer is no. So are you perfectly time aligning the speakers simply because you've compensated for that 5 milliseconds of DSP latency? No.
Well, that would mean that they have to put the subwoofer 6 feet closer to them.
You could put the sub 6 feet closer,
closer to the main speakers. That would be weird.
I mean,
but then you say, let's look at the phase response of the speakers and the phase response of the subwoofer. Are they the same? The answer is no.
Still probably not. Yeah.
Are they integrating beautifully in the time domain simply because we compensated for that 5 milliseconds of latency? The answer probably is no. So then you start noodling around and saying, well, what if I actually move them less than 6 feet? Maybe 5 or 4, to compensate for differences in their phase response, which again gets us back to, are we going to use Room EQ Wizard to measure, and frequency response is king? So you could move the speakers around to adjust for the DSP latency, but you're also really looking at the phase response of the speakers, phase response of the subwoofers, and how nicely they're getting along with each other. Sometimes they don't get along nicely.
I guess I had a wish list for maybe some future iterations of some subwoofers where, because I would like the 2-channel guys, the audiophile guys, to start using subwoofers with DSP, because I think that they would really enjoy the experience. The fact that you can, stuff we talked about, that you can place a sub in various places. Maybe they're sitting in a null, but their speakers need to be there, but you can put the sub somewhere where it's not in a null.
Right.
Things like that. I think that they could really benefit if they were willing. And so I was hoping that maybe a future iteration of somebody's sub would add an RCA output. Not that they may never use it, but let's say some kind of RCA output where the RCA output had an inherent delay to compensate.
We had that feature. We had that feature on a previous generation of amp platform. Nobody ever used it. It had an adjustable time delay on the line out for the mains.
What?
And it nobody ever used it, so we got rid of it.
Oh man, so Fred says we're not willing.
Sorry, Joe. Sorry.
It was there, and frankly, if you are applying DSP to the mains, you really want something like the mini DSP HD that has the resolution and bit rate to do justice to high resolution audio soundtracks. And our amp just didn't have that back in the day.
I see.
It wasn't able to do justice to the full range signal being sent back out.
So I'm joking here, but how about let's go the opposite direction then. So how about a mode just disables all your DSP? No.
Yeah, you can't. Right?
Just
You know what that is? We call that a passive subwoofer. There's no amp in it at all.
I'm joking. I'm joking. I like 20 hertz. So I have another question for you, and then this is the last one for me. It's just basically, I've heard somebody say, "Well, do we really need 20 hertz? Is that really the range of human hearing?" Just because I do hear a lot of producers who cut off the bass around 30 hertz, right, Chana? Your PA speakers, they're not going down to 20 hertz.
Well, they don't need to, right?
They don't. Yeah, they're just trying to get loud. But for me, 20 hertz is the magic number. I say for somebody, if they're buying a sub, save up your money and buy a sub that can do at least 20 hertz. Otherwise, you're gonna have to buy a sub for your sub. It doesn't make any sense. Just buy the one that gets down to 20 hertz. Now, some people like to go below 20 hertz, and I'm okay with that too. But maybe for the people who maybe don't understand that yet, what would be the reason to go to 20 hertz or sub 20 hertz? Do we need that?
Well, the common misconception is that 20 hertz is the limit of audibility. It's not true. The audibility of deeper frequencies is what we call threshold dependent. It's just volume driven. We become increasingly insensitive to deeper frequencies and our ability to perceive them. We've seen the equal loudness curves, the Fletcher-Munson equal loudness curves. That's what those are. And that's what the loudness control and DEQ and everything like that is based on. But can we hear 15 hertz or 16 hertz? Yes. If it's loud enough, we can hear it. But generally we perceive it more than we hear it.
Yep.
Say you're in a church with a true pipe organ with 32-foot stops, the big pipes. And when the organist leans into that 32-foot stop and that 16 hertz note gets pushed out into the church, well, what do you perceive? It's sort of like a pressure or a thickness in the air rather than an audible note. Wow. You can hear 16 hertz if it's loud enough, but generally it's like, wow, I can perceive that because I can feel this pressure, this thickness, this modulation in the air. And that's what the subwoofer can bring to the presentation. If the sub can get down into the teens, it can render that infrasonic foundation, that pressure, that solidity. A good one to try, and we've done it with our own tunable subs. The Flight of the Phoenix remake with Dennis Quaid. The
Flight of the Phoenix.
Because the original one wasn't his, but that's the most popular one. The plane crash scene where they're flying through the sandstorm, that has a lot of infrasonic buffeting in it. And if you look at the soundtrack, you'll see a bunch of stuff at 13, 15, 17 hertz. And if you use one of our, and you can isolate it, Joe, on your software and look at it. If you use one of our variable tune subwoofers and say, I'm going to tune it to standard tuning, 20 hertz, and I'm going to listen to the plane crash scene. Now I'm going to retune it to extended, which will get you down to 15, even 14 hertz in room. It's an obvious difference in the presentation. Why? You get that. We've all opened the windows in our car and felt that modulation and that buffeting. That's a lot of that's infrasonic. It's the same sensation when you tune the sub to extended mode and replay that whole scene. You can feel that solidity, foundation, and buffeting in the room that is much less present in the standard tune. So that's always a good example that I bring up and say, you know what, try this Flight of the Phoenix crash scene and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I got to check that one out. When I used to do more car audio stuff, my friends used to say, like, it sounds like we're underwater. Like,
sure.
Yeah, like underwater sound versus if you're not hitting those low notes, you're not really
even if you can't hear it, you can perceive it, and it does lend itself to influencing your subjective perception of that passage.
Well, definitely the other stuff in the room interacts a little bit differently when you have that type of extension. You may not audibly hear it, but there's definitely some stuff happening in the room a lot of times.
Oh yeah.
Get some stuff down. Like, man,
I know. I can hear 16 hertz, in my living room. That's when the wine glasses are shaking in the kitchen.
Sure. Yeah, stuff starts. What my son and I were watching a show once, and at the end of the scene, the mixing engineers mixed in some, it was infrasonic. It was very deep, and it wasn't super loud, but it was loud enough. And as the scene ended, they kind of mixed it in just for maybe some menace and some tension. The whole couch started going like this, and we couldn't hear anything. And I looked over at him. I said, "Did you feel that?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Back that up. I want to play it again." And we played the scene again. It had to be somewhere around 15 hertz, and the whole couch was moving up and down like this, and the room was shuddering, but I couldn't hear a thing. That it was just a cool moment, cool subwoofer moment. It's like, wow, infrasonics matter. Even if you can't hear them, you can sure perceive them.
Add that to our Easter egg, Chana. So infrasonic, and then the 200 to 250 hertz. We're gonna say something, have some make the beat infrasonic.
Make the beat infrasonic.
You know what I mean?
Right. They can't hear the kick drum, but they can feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all. So let's get to some of these questions. We have
a
about
whole bunch.
like 15 starred ones. Let's do kind of like a rapid fire thing. We
Lightning
good?
round?
Ed, you have to run soon.
No, I'm good.
Questions here. Okay.
Yeah, let's knock out a couple lightning rounds.
All right, here's I was gonna put that one up there too.
Let's go super chats first.
We don't talk about our product roadmaps publicly. That's the most diplomatic answer I can give. All forward-looking, forward-thinking companies have new products in the works, including us. That's not a secret, but we don't talk about the specifics
18-inch.
Just zoom into the pictures in the back. Maybe there's like a little diagram or something in the background. Anything?
All you can see is Gladiator. And
Yeah.
I notice I closed my closet because there's secret stuff in there that you guys can't see.
Nick popped in like, hey.
There's pictures of my son on the wall. That's all you can
I did not expect to be added to the stream, but thank you.
It's like, don't talk about anything, Ed.
See what you say. That's all you have to do. Just start.
You know
talking
what?
about, like,
Nick was probably hitting the dump button. He's like, shut it. You can't talk about new products.
Mute him. Mute him.
I know.
I was lurking in the audience, and
man.
but all good. Just wanted to say hello, and
What's
Ed,
up,
man,
man?
you are killing it. You are just an encyclopedia of low frequency information. So
We're having fun, aren't we?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm enjoying Ed being here, man.
He's
Thank
Mr.
you.
LFI, low frequency information.
low
He's
frequency
got-
Ed.
Oh, damn. Yeah, look at that. LFE.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to ruin this with my lack of knowledge. So you guys put me in the waiting room. I'm just absorbing as much as I can because I learn something every day from it. So
Nick
Are you
showed up
drinking?
it's got to
to.
be a part of
'Cause
it.
I'm not. What are you drinking tonight?
What's that?
What are you drinking tonight? Because we always talk about what we're drinking on the on our happy hour.
All
Yeah,
right,
shout out to Nick. Shout out to Nick.
My
Nick's good
voice
people,
is getting
man.
a little bit hoarse. I got
My
nothing.
son brought this home and he's like, Dad, I'm drinking beer. He's 6 years old. And I'm like, that's that crazy water, Liquid Death. You've seen this.
Nice.
Oh yeah.
Branding. But yeah, so I got
How
one
about
of
that
those.
Death Wish
Real
coffee?
exciting.
Anybody ever tried Death Wish coffee yet?
Oh,
man,
I've
that's
seen that.
killer.
Look,
I've
yeah,
seen
that
that.
sounds awesome.
Hey, Ed.
All
I
right,
want to collab with
hit
you
me with the next.
on Nick's system though.
What's that?
'Cause I know he got his new home theater system, and I'm bugging him like, hey, I wanna see what we can do over there. Maybe I can work with you and share some tips and tricks. Let's just say
Oh, for
on the
sure.
calibration.
We gotta get Nick's system dialed in.
Treatments are coming
You
soon.
need some room treatments in there.
Yeah, they're coming soon.
All right.
Announcement
you
coming
tell-
on the next happy hour.
Tell me I'm not a liar. When you get those room treatments put in and you rerun setup, different system.
Oh, I'm sure.
They're
Yeah,
friend-
I have no doubt. I've heard the difference in a friend's system. So
It's amazing.
There's just a little bit of an echo up there, a little resonance that, that alone, cleaning that up will make a huge difference.
When I did them in my reference theater around the corner, wow, I was just unreal. The difference.
Yeah. So we'll get Nick. I want to get you all set up.
We'll get Nick.
I need more than 20 minutes though.
I mean, I'm off the road after this week, so I'll have some time home finally. Headed to Wayne, New Jersey for an event this Thursday. If you got any people out in the Wayne area.
I was just saying how I wanted some more time to do your room, but you guys had all these obligations. So I was just telling people, check them out next time if you want to see what I did. But I just didn't have enough time. So
Yeah,
maybe
next
we can
next
kinda-
time the obligation needs to be Magic Beans. That's the obligation next
People
time.
think we travel and it's like all, hanging out and partying and stuff. It's like there's so many obligations and, trying to make the most of these trips. So, but we'll build in time for that because it's important enough. I
invited Nick to come over to the house and he didn't. He chose to get tacos instead.
50 feet from my hotel so I could get back and go to sleep.
Yeah, right.
Well, good seeing you, man.
Thank you guys. Great job, Ed, man.
All right. So we have so we have that. What other super chats we have? Project X, thank you for the super chat. He says amplifier damping factor affect this too. I'm not sure exactly what he's speaking. Maybe he's talking about how fast we're talking about how fast and slow.
He's referring to how well the amplifier can control the signal and prevent ringing. And the damping factor of the amplifier is orders of magnitude shorter and less audible than ringing in the time domain from a loudspeaker or a subwoofer or even the room itself. I mean, have you ever been in a room where the signal stopped and the suspended ceiling tiles wiggle around for half a second? I mean, that's an example of the room itself is ringing for 300, 400, 500, 600 milliseconds. So the damping factor of the amplifier, not relevant in this discussion because it's so much better than the loudspeakers in the room itself that it's really a non-event.
Well, I've seen other subwoofer companies that have like servos and things like that, and I've always told people, if you have a good enough, powerful enough amplifier, it'll control it'll control the driver. It does everything it needs to do. So it's also a combination of the motor and how strong the field strength is in the motor and how well it controls the voice coil motion and the weight of the moving mass of the driver, the spiders and the cone and the surround and everything like that all factors into it. But again, it gets back to, can the subwoofer play that frequency? Yes. Well, it has adequate transient response. Again, we get back to what's the time domain behavior of the entire system, not just the driver, but the whole system. All right. We have this one here. Thank you for the super chat, Victor. Opinion on one large ported sub versus two sealed.
Well, if you're looking at strictly at output, let's talk about in the same family of subs, maybe a PB2000 Pro and an SB2000 Pro. What's max output of the two at different frequencies? Well, from about 50 hertz on up, 50 to 100 hertz, are pretty darn close because we're just talking amp and woofer at that point. Once you get down around 40 hertz and deeper, the cabinet size really starts to matter. So we have a much bigger cabinet on the PB2000 Pro. So at 40 hertz, PB2000 Pro has roughly 1.5 times higher dynamic output. At 32 hertz, it has twice the dynamic output. At 25 hertz, it has 3 times the dynamic output. And at 20 hertz, 4 times the dynamic output. Wow. You would literally need 4 SB2000 Pros to match one PB2000 Pro in output only at 20 hertz. Now, if you said to me, Ed, would you take 4 SB2000 Pros or 1 PB2000 Pro? Well, 4 SBs hands down because they're equal at 20 and the SB is slaughtered everywhere else, right? And so you're getting way more output in the more common base ranges, and you're getting the benefit of multiple subs in the room from a modal distribution standpoint and everything like that. So we really got to look at what are the needs of the user in that size room. Can one sealed sub play loud enough to satisfy their playback level in that room? Or do they need 2 sealed subs? Or maybe do they need a ported sub? Maybe they're just limited to 1 subwoofer. A single sealed sub can't play loud enough for them. So they got to go for a ported sub because dynamic compression is a lot more egregious than differences in time domain behavior. So say you're overloading a small sealed sub that can't handle a big room and you're trying to play, the latest Avengers blockbuster movie at reference level. Well, it just can't play that loud in the 18 to 36 hertz octave, which is where all that LFE lives, right? Yeah. And a larger ported sub can play multiple times louder. So sometimes it makes sense to have a ported sub in your application if you're really looking at room filling, a big room, and dynamics are really important. But other times, the sealed subwoofer, I always like to say there's nothing a ported sub can do that a sealed sub can't do better, except for max output. I run sealed subs in my own reference system. Why? Because ultimately I get better time domain behavior, and I have enough output in my system so it doesn't matter to me. I don't need ported subs in my system. I have enough sealed subs, and I'm benefiting from the time domain behavior, and I'm benefiting from taking better advantage of room gain. My subs are flat to 8 hertz in my reference theater because they're sealed, and I'm taking better advantage of room gain than a ported sub can. So there's really advantages to sealed subs in certain applications. I'm a big fan of them for that reason. So, it's one of those things. We have a running joke in our own, sorry, I'm losing my voice. In our own broadcast, happy hour, we say, well, it depends.
It depends, yeah.
Real quick, what do you think about people that want to throw in one of these into their home theater?
Wow, what a beauty that is. The PA style subwoofers have incredible, amazing output from about 35 hertz on up. That's where they're designed to do. Tons of slam and impact. That sub can probably play 140, 145 dB. It's not designed for a home theater. It's designed for stage use.
Yeah. I always say to keep them separate. Keep the pro audio stuff to the pro audio people. The home theater stuff just buy a home theater sub.
You can.
I want to mix it up. I want to put an old stroker in a box.
A stroker in a box.
I mean, how much output do you really need?
Well, funny thing,
in your own system. That's really the question that you need to answer.
Right. We had a little barbecue for Father's Day yesterday. Shout out to all dads. I don't know if you're a dad, Ed.
Yep, I am.
Okay, happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
And they're all going to this festival tomorrow or tonight or whatever, and they were watching some bass music, like DJ sets in there. And Joe and I had just done the Magic Beans on the system upstairs, and it has this 2 15-inch sealed subs, and they're like, "Where's the bass? I thought you just fixed this. Where's the bass?" And I turned up the volume. And I'm like, "We got to turn up the volume." And they're like, "Well, can't you just turn up the bass?" I'm like, "Well, I don't want to just turn up the bass when the volume's at 30. And then they were just like, "Well, they're like, we don't hear any bass. We don't hear any." I'm like, "Okay, screw it." So I just went to the back of the sub and jacked the level all the way to plus. And they're like, "Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right."
That's all they wanted.
It's not accurate. It's not a good reproduction of the sound. But if it's loud, and if you've grown up with subs and car audio, and you got the slamming bass, that's what you like. If you're like going clubbing, I mean, let's face it, you go into a club, what's hammering you in the chest? The subs. Yeah, they're way louder than they should be, but that's what people like in clubs. So that's where you find that screw and vig.
I DJ, I produce electronic music, so I know
sure,
100%.
Of course.
Yeah. All right, so another super chat from Alex the Great. We want to hear from the man Ed. Price to performance considered, what sub from your lineup are you picking for a 14 by 10 room, 12-foot ceilings?
Now, see, that's a pretty small room from a cubic foot standpoint. Fairly tall ceilings, but that room, you're going to have quite a bit of room gain in that room, which is a natural augmentation of the deepest frequencies. When the room transitions from a modal to a pressure zone, the room won't support standing waves below a certain frequency. And when that happens, it starts augmenting the low end output of the subwoofer, which we call that room gain. So in that size room, I would probably run a sealed sub and take advantage of the room gain so I could get extra deep extension. And then really the question is, how loud do you want to play the system? Yeah. And that in turn dictates what model or models we would recommend.
So
It's
10
I
by
love the
14.
3000, the SB 3000s. I feel like they're such a sweet spot for everything.
It
Like
is.
with the whole lineup. I mean, all of pretty much every sub that I've ever tried from you guys is excellent. You know,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, oh, this one, stay away from this one. I haven't tried the super old stuff, but like, I have a PB 1000 Pro, have an SB 3000, I have the 3000 Micro. You know, they all have their certain.
Yeah, they're all designed for certain applications, certain niche. I would say in that size room, if you're going to play at a pretty loud level, movies, I'd throw a pair of SB 3000s in there, and that would be really nice.
So this room is 10 by 14 with 8-foot ceiling, and I have a PB 1000 Pro in here. You're talking about two SB 3000s, man. Damn, it's gonna be loud. It would shake the shit out of everything, bro.
Well, okay, if Chana, you went back and did that to the gain and cranked it up, but if it's
okay,
if it's level matched, if both of them are level matched, right, with the rest of the system, it's gonna sound great. You're gonna get the extra deep extension from room gain. And you're going to have adequate dynamic headroom to capture those loud passages when they occur, without dynamic compression. That's the key.
Okay.
When you add sub in the system, a lot of people will be like, oh, you're over subbing the room. It's going to be too powerful. No, it's not. If it's level matched, it'll be exactly what it needs to be.
It'll have headroom too.
Yes, it will scale up and hit those loud peaks without compression. And that's what adds realism to the presentation. And then it steps back and does the subtle background stuff and supports the audio track and the speakers without drawing attention to itself. The biggest mistake somebody can make is to undersub the room and then turn up the gain to compensate for it, because the quiet, subtle bass is way too loud. And the really loud bass doesn't get loud enough because the subwoofer hits its compression limits. So what have you done? You've taken the dynamic range and you
Squashed it.
So all the quiet bass is way too loud. All the loud bass doesn't get any louder. So it turns into this massive droning mess. And you've lost all the dynamic range of the soundtrack, and the presentation suffers. It sounds awful.
I like it. Really, I like
headroom. That's what you need in this system.
You're making a lot of sense. I love it. I love all the sense that you're making, because, I went on a little bit of a rant about stuff that I hear out there. And so it's very refreshing to me to have you on here talking about stuff that makes sense. And actually, it's not just theory, but it's obvious that you've tried these things. And that's what I really like, is to hear somebody's real world experience. Like, we've taken the subs outside and we flipped the switch, and theory is sometimes, it doesn't align all the time. So taking the time to put in the work, try things out, I really respect that.
That's why I love Room EQ Wizard and having your own microphone. How many of us have seen the standing wave calculators, right? And say, okay, I'm going to have the standing wave right here in the room, and I'm going to avoid it. And how many times have we seen that doesn't align with reality when you actually take a frequency response measurement and say, well, that's not what the calculator says. Well, I'm like, well,
it takes 30 seconds. Just measure it.
Right.
30 seconds. They'll tell you right now where the null is.
Real world trumps theory every time. And that's why you learn the most when you actually break out the microphone and start measuring and listening.
I'm the guy who spends all night. I'll mess around with different random things all night, so that when I come on here, or if I make a video and I say something, I know from experience. I don't and of course I read the books too, kind of tie them together. But a lot of times it's just that little extra bit of knowledge, personal experience.
It's fun when you experiment and you build up your knowledge base based on actual factual data, measurements, and observations.
So here's from one of our patrons. I don't want to just only do the super chats. I don't want you guys thinking you have to pay, to have us put your stuff up, but it helps. It definitely helps. It shows up in a yellow color here. It kind of makes it obvious to us.
It helps.
But, all right. So Paul, he says, at what frequency is the phase adjustment? What frequency, when you say
frequency dependent?
How does the sub know what the physical phase knob should be adjusting? See, Paul, I got you. I did some. I even translated for you there.
Well, it probably the easiest way to describe this one would be, let's say you set the phase control from to 30 degrees of phase delay, and the amplifier is actually implementing this phase change to the signal, and we say, what is 30 degrees of phase rotation at 80 hertz, and you can actually figure out what that is from a frequency and a wavelength standpoint. And then the rhetorical question is that the same as 30 degrees of phase rotation at 20 hertz or even 16 hertz? And the answer is no, because of the differences in the wavelengths of the frequencies. So that's really to me, the best way to describe it. So when you adjust phase delay on the amplifier and on the subwoofer, that phase delay is frequency dependent, and you're dialing in 15 or 30 degrees of phase rotation. That's not uniform across the entire bandwidth of the subwoofer.
I guess I'm not sure if this is what he meant, but is there a certain frequency that it centers around, or?
Yeah, typically,
Okay.
for years and years and years.
SVS.
It was 80 hertz forever.
Okay.
It's a little bit lower now. I think the center frequency of the phase control might be maybe closer to 60 hertz. I'd have to check it. But forever and ever, it was 80 hertz. That was the phase control. That was the center frequency of the phase control.
Okay. All right. So a few more here. So here's this bright yellow box here that's saying Project X, $10 super chat. Thank you. He says, I've noticed a difference in LFE output between two subs swapped in the same enclosure. Higher output at 20 hertz, older sub with FS of around 21 hertz versus the same model with stiffer suspension, FS of 35 hertz. The TS parameters, teal small parameters.
Yep.
So he's getting real advanced over here.
Well, basically, so you got the same size cabinet, and you have two woofers. One of them with a deeper FS, meaning that woofer wants to have more output or live at a deeper frequency, versus one with a higher resonance frequency. So you would see this revealed in the differences in the frequency responses as well. So you would sweep both subwoofers, and one of them would have the one with the FS of 35 hertz that would have a peak around that frequency, depending on the box size. But that one would want to have more mid and upper bass output, simply because of the TS parameters and the way it's designed. The other one would have higher, deeper bass output, but possibly at the expense of mid and upper bass output. So it really depends on what the design goals are, how big the box is, whether it's sealed, whether it's ported, where you want the woofer to have the resonance frequency and more natural output. There's a lot that goes into it. You wouldn't want to have a woofer with a very lively and pronounced resonance frequency and hump in the frequency response that you would have to EQ out afterwards. So you want to sort of design the TS parameters of the woofer and the cabinet size and the cabinet, whether it's bass reflex or sealed, they're all interrelated with each other. So when you're doing the design phase and you're looking at your modeling and the TS parameters of the driver and say, all right, we want a decent sized sealed cabinet like the SB16 Ultra, and we design the TS parameters of that driver to live and have a decent looking frequency response in that size cabinet. Before we even start applying EQ to the system, we've already pre-designed that woofer to live in that size enclosure and behave the way we want it to.
I love how you describe the FS as where does a sub want to live.
It is. It's the freer resonance frequency of the driver. That's where it has the highest. You see, measure it in free air. Where does this subwoofer? Where does this driver want to have? Where does it want to live? Where does it want to have the most output?
That's great.
And that's the resonance frequency of that driver as a system, which are the teal small parameters.
I guess you have to be a super nerd to be like, oh, I see what you mean. That's where it just wants to hang out.
But the DIY guys, they get all that stuff. They've got all the modeling programs, and they can spec the woofer that they want for that particular application.
Whoa. Okay. Hi Finest, thank you for the super chat. I have an open concept room with dual SB16s. I have the left sub in the corner, which has 6 dB room gain over the right sub, open to the kitchen. Is this the best positioning, or should I flank the TV?
You know, and what it is, he's actually talking about boundary gain. That sub's just louder in that location of the room than the other sub. 6 dB literally is a doubling of the output. So one subwoofer is playing twice as loud as the other. If you want to level match them, which is what we do recommend, you've got to run 6 dB higher gain on the
other
one that's near the open area. And this just gets back to we normally start with a corner and work from there. But the one that's near the opening of the room with less boundary gain is going to be working a lot harder, which might not be a big deal unless you're pushing the entire system really loud. And then that sub, even though it's an SB16, it's going to hit its limits 6 dB sooner than the other one because you're running at 6 dB hotter. So that one could run into dynamic compression artifacts earlier and potentially have some issues. So I would say if there's a 6 dB delta in output between those two subs at the same gain setting, I would say look for a better location for that second subwoofer and get it away from that permanent opening.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Two more here. And I think that's it for right now. So Project X, thank you for the super chat again. He said, I heard Sirwin Vega thoughts. I know they're one of the few left who still produce old school format towers with large drivers. I wonder if they still have those red surrounds.
Yeah, I think they do, actually.
You guys should do blue surrounds. That'll be your thing. Blue surround. Can you do it?
Yeah, we can do it. But, you know, Sirwin Vega, they've been around forever. Their reputation back in the day was they could play loud and clean, and they could. And they're sort of an iconic brand. So I don't throw shade on any brands really.
No. How could you throw shade on Sirwin Vega?
You can't. Sirwin Vega is a cool brand. They're just not mainstream home theater, mainstream audio anymore. I'm just not seeing them for sale in the normal retail channels, at least that we live in. Like say, you're looking at what are the top brands like a B&W and Focal and Klipsch and Polk and SVS, but it's an iconic brand and they still perform really well.
Yeah, I think it's just the ownership changes hands, and then it's just a name sometimes. I don't know. I haven't reviewed any of the new stuff, but I would take an old Sirwin Vega stroker. I'm telling you, put it into like a home theater box and have like the only home theater stroker.
Plus the name, right? The name's awesome. It's boss Sirwin Vega. Just connotes power, right? Yeah, it's Sirwin Vega's vintage.
It just sounds great. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it does. It's good stuff.
I'm blue surround. I'm telling you, that's a free one. Nick can write that one down. As long as the foam doesn't fall apart, you got to stick together. Got to use the new stuff. All right, so Juan, thank you for the super chat. This will be the last one, I think. He says I had to disassemble the speaker to add custom vinyl wrap, and now I don't know which color wire set from the crossover corresponds to which driver.
Well, see that's an interesting one because it's prime center. So if you're looking at a 3-way crossover, the woofers, let's take a sub for an easier example. You say a subwoofer, what is absolute polarity in the driver? Well, you can take a 9-volt battery and touch it to the terminals, and if the woofer bumps out, that is the correct polarity, and obviously you got to go positive to positive, negative to negative, and say, all right, well, now I know what's positive and what's negative. But if you look at the crossover network and you understand crossover design, there are phase rotations in the crossover network when you're high passing and low passing, going from the woofers to the mid-range to the tweeter. And it becomes a lot fuzzier and a lot more of a gray area. And you say, all right, is this actually positive and negative? And all of our speakers do have markings on them, and you should be able to determine what's positive and what's negative on each driver, because it should have a mark actually on the speaker tab.
I mean,
and if you do that to the tweeter and it moves forward, then that's bad news.
And you would never do that, right? You only do that to only do bump test on the woofer. Never bump test you could do it to a mid-range driver, maybe with 1.5 volt battery. But if you bump test a tweeter with 9 volts DC, you can probably kiss that tweeter goodbye. Yeah. That'll be the end of it.
So Juan, what I would do is I would just order another one from Amazon, open it up, and be like, oh, these go here, those go there, pop it back in. Return
and
it.
if he's a Prime Center owner, he can contact us in customer service, and we can tell him how the crossover network connects to the drivers if for some reason he took it apart.
Yeah, you guys have great customer service, and if you had REW and a U mic, you could probably see which way measures.
Oh yeah, of course. If you wired the mid range wrong, that would show up immediately in the frequency response. That would be a big suck out in the mid range.
All right, so that's pretty much it. Again, thank you, Project X, for the additional super chat. Let me see. What I think. You know what? Let me just say this one, just because Bodhi is also a patron of ours. He says, Ed, my living room is 10 by 10 with a arch opening dead in the back and a doorway to the kitchen on the side. Where should I put my 2 SB1000 Pros?
Put them in the corners, like we talked about earlier. I don't put them near permanent openings, because you're going to get less boundary gain and less output from the system. Start with the corners so you can get good boundary gain and the highest standing wave density in the room, and go from there.
All right. All right. So I'm getting okay. Let's wrap it up. Somebody says that you need your voice for tomorrow. All right. All right.
Yeah, I'm losing my voice
for sure. All right. Well, thank you again, Ed. Let's see here. Anything else, Chana? You want to wrap it up? Hang out. Don't hit end at the end of this. Ed, I just have a question for you.
Sure.
But yeah, what else do you need to say? Anything else we need to say, Chana?
Other than, make sure if you're buying subwoofers, you guys
merch
purchase from SVS. Check out SVS the subwoofers.
We're always happy to come on and drop knowledge. It's just fun to cross-pollinate our shows. We had you guys on as a guest earlier, and it was great, and I'm happy to return the favor. It's really just about sharing of knowledge, isn't it? Yeah. And sense of community. It really doesn't have much to do in the end with a brand at all. We work all day long with customers who have different brand electronics and loudspeakers and subwoofers in some cases. So it's okay. It's really about knowledge sharing, and to me, and community. So that's what this is all about. And awesome. thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on the
show. Well, I like to say, to support the people who care about you, the people who are giving back to the community. I'd rather support those companies than the guys that are just just a name. You never see any people. So I'm happy to support you guys. So
thank you.
You guys have always been good to me, and I know you guys support your customers. So I'm happy to recommend you guys. It says here, so real quick, Daily HiFi Crew merch. You see that? Look at that. Boom.
That's right.
Get some new merch. It's you can go shop.dailyhifi.com and you'll see it down below. What else? We have our audio only version of the podcast.
Stop it, Joe.
Anchor.fm/Daily HiFi. And we have our after show where we just talk with you guys. So patreon.com/Daily HiFi if you want to become a patron. And thank you guys to everybody who supported on this one. And thank you to Ed. And thank you to Nick for making this happen. Thank you, SVS. And Chana, of course, my man. Take us out, bro.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out. This is the Daily HiFi Podcast. We do this every Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Make sure, if you're watching on the replay, to subscribe to the channel and be here for the live show to ask your questions. On behalf of my man Joe and our special guest today, Ed, see you guys next time.
Thanks.